All right, I'm back. Let's make a little noise. First, I'm going to be playing through my PRS Santana. Starting out with, if you can see the small amp on the floor in the back, that is my PV Studio solid state amp. Pretty good amp. And but the problem is, it's really not a problem. I kind of like a little bit more of a tube sound. So I'm going to start with that. Okay, so I'll explain to you what I've got going on here. The blue one here, that is actually a tube amp modeler. Most everything on here, aside from the actual Boss distortion, most everything else is Behringer brand, and I haven't had any problem. They've all been pretty good to me. It's a tube amp modeler. You can get kind of a Fenderish sound, as well as sort of a Marshall sound. I mean, no, they're not going to be quite like the real thing, but they kind of emulate that sound. But what I use it for is a tone shaper. Okay, so here's the sound of my amp by itself. Not a bad sound. I feel like it's a real good country amp. Sometimes it just doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just not quite warm enough for me. So, what I do is I'll just click this on. I use it as a amp modeler. Here's the same thing. Don't know if you can hear much difference here without it. A little bit harder mids, it seems like. Warms it up a little bit. Different settings on here. You can go even to a real heavy overdriven tone. That's what I use these for. So going from that, I've got a reverb on here, and now this amp has a good reverb on it, but I turned it off to demonstrate. What if you have an amp that doesn't have a reverb, or the reverb doesn't work, like the Marshall that you can see in the screen there? It's a great amp, but the reverb doesn't work. And I don't like to use an amp without reverb. So, it's got a spring reverb setting that sounds pretty good. So there you go. Just bring the reverb with you. Plug into an amp with no reverb, you still got reverb. So I'm going to leave that on. That's usually an always on kind of effect. Hardly ever turn it off. We'll go from there. We've got a digital reverb delay. You can do a lot of different settings with that. I use it just for straight, just for the delay alone. And it has tap tempo. You can do all that cool stuff. I'm not real good with delay. I just use it as kind of a background sound. In fact, I feel it works a little bit better when I play more, sort of country style. You can mix the reverb. It's got its own different reverb settings as well. You can get into the really ambient reverbs. Really cool. It's just not something that I do a lot, because the way I typically play is where I'm playing both rhythm and throwing in lead parts in between the rhythm. Too much reverb can almost it can override the rest of the music unless you use it right. I just don't use it right. Now this one's not the best. It's an octaver. Very rarely will I have a use for that. It's kind of cool. It's got a couple different settings on it. I think it's kind of messed up. You hear that? It's got a heartbeat in it. A little creepy. So yeah, we're gonna move on. Actually, the reason I use that is if I'm using a looper and I need a little bass, you can set this where you get more of the bass tone, and I'll just play it like. So once you lay that down, then you play over. So yeah, that's my use for it. Other than that, I really don't have a use for it. All right, now we get into the cool stuff. All I've really got on here effects-wise, an overdrive, a distortion, and a fuzz. So let's start with the blues overdrive. This is my main one. I don't use a whole lot of heavy distortion. I use more heavy overdrive, which there is a slight difference. From clean, my volume drop. I like it just kind of a crunchy overdrive because I tend to still use it for rhythm. In a church setting, typically I'm doing my rhythm clean. As the song builds, I might add a little bit. Use it sometimes just to kind of roll into the chords. So that's really my favorite tone. And in fact, you might be able to hear even the clean tone. The way I have the amp set, it's kind of on the edge of breakup, or at least that's the term. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about anyway. Just slightly got a little grit in it. So then when I kick on the overdrive, okay, so we go from there. Let's say I still wanted to keep my overdrive on, but I just wanted to boost a little when I go into a lead part without kicking on one pedal and kicking off the other. I'll just leave that on. And kick on my distortion. Back into overdrive. So yeah, that's mostly how I use distortion. I've got it set pretty high, as you can tell. Okay, so this is the DS1. Everybody talks about how the DS1 has kind of a mid-sweep to it. You can hear that so much. A little bit more piercing in the highs. You can fix that really with an EQ. EQ pedals are going to be your friend. And I'd actually like to get 2 or 3 of them on this board, because you can really shape your tone. So what I would do is probably put an EQ right here in the middle. And all you'd have to do is bump your mids up a little bit, and you're going to alter that sound. Here's another thing I do is I just run it into the overdrive. Here's without it. Not a big difference, but it's enough that it thickens it up a little bit. usually be playing on the Overdrive anyways. But, you know, use them both together, it's a pretty cool tone. I actually prefer the sound of them together without my Overdrive in it. I get a lot of that fizzy distortion. I like high gain without the dirt, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Put that on. Like it smooths out some of the dirt. Okay, so we go from there. And the reason I have a Boss distortion on here as opposed to another Behringer is because I found the Boss at a really good deal. Because I just don't spend money on my pedals. I told you I'm just kind of cheap. So if I can get the same thing at a cheap price, I do. I jumped on it. I think I paid like $40 for it, which is a super good deal. Alright, so when we go on to the Super Fuzz, it's really cool, except it's not real usable with chords, because this is not what I thought it was when I bought it. It's got kind of a, not quite an octaver. It's not like an octave fuzz, but you'll see what I mean. Okay, so here's my fuzz. Once you do chords, it just sounds like a lot of noise. So I'll invest in some kind of a fuzz face type. That's really the sound I prefer. But it's still really cool, but you can do this and mix it with your Overdrive. Alright, so there you have it. That's basically the idea. How I use these pedals anyways. Does a pretty good job for me. You know, hey, you don't have to go with the highest end stuff out there, but I like that stuff too. If I could afford it, I'd probably be going with that too. But just know that sometimes it's just about how you use it, how you set it up, or how you run one pedal into another. You can still get really great tones. And even if you're playing on an amp you don't like, I'm not going to say I don't, I actually like this amp a lot. Okay, so there's without my tube modeler. But sometimes it has a harsh tone. You can still work with it. I used to use an EQ pedal on this. And you can still make it sound great. So there it is. There's my homemade pedal board rig. And I might make one more video here and show you what it sounds like going through the Marshall. How about that? Alright, we'll see you later.